Your stomach is on fire. You're 7 years old, lie on a dirt floor somewhere in Central Europe 7,000 years ago. Your mother just gave you a bowl of warm milk, still steaming from the goat outside. Within an hour, your gut is cramping so hard you can't stand up straight. You're sweating. You're doubled over. And by nightfall, you're losing fluid faster than your small body can replace it. This isn't an allergic reaction. This isn't poison. This is milk. The same substance that kept you alive as an infant is now attacking you from the inside. Nobody around you understands why. There's no germ theory, no biology textbook, no explanation waiting in a museum exhibit. All anyone knows is that some children drink milk and thrive, and others drink milk and get sick, sometimes sick enough to die. And here's the part that should stop you cold. Almost every human being on Earth, for nearly 200,000 years, was born with this exact same vulnerability. You were never supposed to drink milk past infancy. None of your ancestors were. And the fact that you might be drinking a glass of it right now without a second thought is one of the strangest biological accidents in the history of our species. This is a story of how humans broke their own bodies to survive, and somehow won. For most of human history, milk was baby food, and only baby food. Every mammal on the planet follows the same basic rule. You're born, you drink your mother's milk, your body produces an enzyme called lactase to break down the sugar inside it, and then once you're weaned, that enzyme production shuts off. Forever. It's not a malfunction. It's the plan. Nature assumes you won't need to digest milk again once you've got teeth and can chew solid food. Every mammal on Earth follows this rule. Cats, dogs, whales, elephants, and for 200,000 years, Homo sapiens followed it too, which means that somewhere between 4 and 7 years old, ancient children's bodies quietly switched off the machinery that let them digest milk sugar, and it stayed off for the rest of their lives. So when the first humans started domesticating animals, roughly 10 to 11,000 years ago, they created a problem nobody saw coming. They now had access to an entirely new food source: thick, fatty, calorie-dense milk from goats, sheep, and later cattle. And most of the adults in their communities were biologically incapable of drinking it without consequence. Try to sit with that for a second. Imagine standing next to a herd of goats, milk practically dripping with survival potential during a famine, and your own body treating it like a threat. But here's what scientists actually found when they started digging into the genetics of this. It wasn't just discomfort. For adults without the enzyme, drinking milk meant the undigested sugar, lactose, traveled straight into the large intestine. Their gut bacteria fermented it, producing gas, bloating, and pulling water into bowel through osmosis. The result was violent, dehydrating diarrhea. In a world without electrolyte drinks, without hospitals, without any way to replace fluids quickly, that kind of diarrhea could kill you. It still kills malnourished children in parts of the world today. So think about what that means for early farming communities. You've got a herd of animals capable of producing food almost every single day. No hunting required. No waiting for crops to grow. And yet drinking that food raw could make you sicker than starving would have. This is where the story gets interesting and where most people's assumptions about ancient humans start to fall apart. You'd think evolution moves too slowly to matter here. You'd think 10,000 years is nothing on a biological timescale, barely a blink. And for most traits, you'd be right. But lactase persistence, the ability to keep digesting milk into adulthood, turned out to be one of the fastest cases of natural selection ever documented in humans. Faster than skin pigmentation changes. Faster than most disease resistance mutations. In some populations, it may be the single strongest selective pressure ever measured in the human genome, which raises the obvious question: why would a random genetic mutation, one that simply kept a childhood enzyme switched on, spread through entire populations in just a few thousand years? The answer is brutal, and it's the kind of answer that should make you rethink what evolution actually rewards. Picture two neighboring families in a Neolithic farming village, somewhere around 6,000 years ago. Both families own cattle. Both families are struggling through a bad harvest year, crops failing, stored grain running low. One family has children who, by some genetic fluke, kept producing lactase into adulthood. The other family's children lost that ability, like almost everyone else on the planet at the time. When the grain runs out, both families turn to their herds. The lucky family can drink milk straight from the animal, gulping down a steady stream of calories, protein, fat, and hydration. The other family gets sick every time they try. Bloating, cramping, diarrhea that drains them exactly when they can least afford it. Now stretch that scenario across generations, across famines, across harsh winters, across every hard year a population endured. The children who could digest milk survived those crises more often. They grew stronger. They had more children of their own. And slowly, without anyone understanding why, the mutation that let adults drink milk started spreading through the population, not because anyone chose it, but because it kept killing off the alternative. Here's the part that tends to surprise people. This mutation didn't originate once and spread from a single point. It arose independently, in different populations at different times, in different parts of the world. European populations developed one version of the mutation. East African cattle herding populations developed a completely different one. Middle Eastern populations developed yet another. All of them landed on the same basic outcome. Keep the lactase gene switched on through entirely separate genetic pathways. This is what scientists call convergent evolution, and it's one of the clearest signs that natural selection was acting with real force, in real time, on real human suffering. When multiple isolated populations independently stumble onto the same solution, it's not a coincidence. It's a sign that the was massive, and this connects to something deeply human, something you probably felt yourself without ever tracing it back this far. Every time your body craves a specific food during stress, illness, or exhaustion, you're running on ancient wiring shaped by exactly this kind of survival math. Your ancestors weren't eating whatever tasted good. They were eating whatever kept their gut from betraying them during the worst years of their lives. The cravings you dismiss as random are often echoes of selection pressure that once decided who lived and who didn't. Now here's where you need to sit up, because the story most people assume about this, that milk simply made civilization stronger, full stop, happy ending, isn't the whole picture. What you're about to hear was hidden from most textbook versions of the story, buried under a much cleaner, much more flattering narrative about human progress. The truth is that lactase persistence didn't spread evenly. It didn't spread quickly for most of the world. And for thousands of years, the ability to drink milk as an adult created a hidden divide inside farming societies, one written directly into people's bodies. In early Neolithic Europe, archaeologists have found something strange when they look at ancient DNA. The genetic mutation for lactase persistence was incredibly rare among the first farmers who arrived with cattle, sheep, and goats. These were people actively raising dairy animals, actively producing milk, and yet most of them still couldn't drink it as adults without getting sick. So what did they do with it? This is where ancient humans found a workaround that changed everything, and it didn't require a single genetic mutation. They fermented it. Cheese, yogurt, fermented curds. When milk is fermented, bacteria break down most of the lactose before it ever reaches your gut, converting sugar into lactic acid. Suddenly, a food that could send an adult into dehydrating agony became something almost anyone could eat safely. Ancient humans didn't wait around for evolution to fix the problem. They engineered around it, using microbiology they didn't even know existed, purely through trial, error, and desperation. Think about how strange that is. Somewhere thousands of years before anyone understood bacteria, before anyone understood fermentation on a cellular level, someone left milk sitting in an animal skin container, came back later, found it had transformed into something edible, and didn't get sick. Someone tried it again, and again, until an entire food technology emerged from nothing but repeated accidents and stubborn survival instinct. Archaeologists have actually found physical proof of this. Pottery fragments from Neolithic sites in Poland and Britain, dating back roughly 7,000 years, show chemical residues of dairy fat consistent with cheese making, not raw milk consumption. Strainers with tiny perforated holes, almost identical in function to modern cheesecloth setups, have been pulled directly out of the ground at sites where lactase persistence genes were still nearly absent in the population. In other words, humans were making cheese long before most of them could safely drink a glass of milk. But here's what scientists actually found that complicates the picture even further. Fermentation solved the digestion problem, but it didn't solve every problem. Fermented dairy still required labor, timing, storage, and knowledge passed down carefully through generations. In hard years, when speed and simplicity mattered more than anything, raw milk, fresh, immediate, calorie-dense, was still tempting. And in populations where the lactase persistence mutation hadn't spread yet, that temptation came with a real cost. This is where the story turns darker and where the human toll of this transition becomes impossible to ignore. Skeletal evidence from early farming communities across Europe shows something disturbing when compared to earlier hunter-gatherer populations. Rates of childhood malnutrition, stunted growth, and infant mortality appear to have increased in the initial centuries after the shift to agriculture and dairying, not decreased. Farming was supposed to mean more food, more stability, less risk. Instead, in many places, it meant new diseases, new nutritional gaps, and in some communities, a food source sitting right in front of them that their own bodies couldn't fully use. Ask yourself how that must have felt. You've domesticated an animal. You've built a life around its milk, its meat, its labor, and your own children still get sick from drinking what should be right there for the taking. This is the moment worth pausing on, because it forces a question most people never think to ask about their own instincts. If your body reacts badly to something, do you assume the substance is dangerous, or do you assume something is wrong with you? Ancient humans didn't have the luxury of blaming their genetics. They only had the outcome in front of them, a sick child, an untouched bowl of milk, and no explanation. How many of your own instincts today, about food, about fear, about disgust, are inherited reactions from problems your body solved differently than you'd expect? Now, let's return to the genetic side of the story, because this is where things escalate toward the most disturbing part of this entire history. Genetic studies on ancient DNA have traced the spread of lactase persistence across Europe with startling precision, and the results don't match the simple story of farmers arrived, cows arrived, everyone adapted. Instead, the mutation appears to have stayed rare for thousands of years after dairying began, only spreading rapidly much later, likely accelerated by specific crisis periods. Famines, migrations, population collapses, where the ability to digest raw milk became the difference between surviving a catastrophe and not. Some researchers argue the spread of lactase persistence tracks closely with periods of instability, disease outbreaks, and failed harvests, precisely the moments when access to an emergency calorie source like raw milk mattered most. In other words, this trait may not have spread because life was good. It may have spread because life, for long stretches, was brutal, and milk tolerance was one of the few advantages separating families who made it through a crisis from families who didn't. This is the midpoint reveal that changes how you should think about the entire premise of this video. We tend to imagine dairy farming as a peaceful, gradual improvement in human life, cows grazing, milk flowing, civilization steadily advancing. But the genetic record suggests something closer to a slow-motion filtering event, where an entire class of people across multiple regions were quietly weeded out of the gene pool over centuries because their bodies couldn't tolerate a food source that had become central to survival. Every time you drink a glass of milk without a second thought, you're carrying the result of that filtering. Somewhere in your ancestry, real people got sick. Some of them didn't survive it. And the version of humanity that exists today, the version capable of casually pouring milk into coffee, exists specifically because those failures happened first. Let that sit for a moment. This isn't a triumphant story of humans conquering nature. It's a story of humans surviving their own mistakes, generation after generation, at a cost most of us never learn about. And this connects to something worth recognizing about how modern humans still relate to food today. We tend to treat dietary tolerance as a personal trait, something quirky about our individual bodies, lactose intolerant, gluten sensitive, whatever the label. But these tolerances are historical residue. They're the leftover fingerprints of which populations survived which crises, using which foods. Your grandmother's stomach and your own relationship with dairy might be tracing a survival story that started thousands of years before either of you existed. Now here's the detail that tends to genuinely disturb people once they understand the full scope of it, and it's the piece most documentaries leave out entirely. Roughly 2/3 of the world's adult population today is still lactose intolerant. not a small minority, not an unusual exception. The majority. High lactase persistence rates are concentrated mainly in populations with ancestry from Northern Europe, parts of the Middle East, and specific cattle herding populations in East Africa, like the Maasai and Tutsi. Meanwhile, the vast majority of people with East Asian, West African, Native American, and South Asian ancestry retain the ancestral, original human condition, the inability to digest milk sugar as adults, which means a popular image of milk as a universal human food, something everyone's body is built to handle, is actually a regional exception, not the global rule. Most of humanity never adapted to drink milk. Most of humanity is, biologically speaking, still living in the same condition your ancestors were 7,000 years ago, before any of this began. Think about how that flips the entire framing of dairy in modern culture. Milk is marketed in many parts of the world as an essential universal food, something every growing child needs. But for the majority of humans on Earth, drinking large quantities of it triggers exactly the same bloating, cramping, and digestive distress that nearly killed children in Neolithic farming villages thousands of years ago. The biology never fully caught up to the marketing. And here's the final layer of this story, the part that pushes past disturbing and into something closer to unsettling. The genetic mutation for lactase persistence isn't a single, unified trait humans develop once. It's at least 5 separate mutations that arose independently around the world, in different populations at different points in history, all converging on the same basic outcome. This means multiple different groups of humans, isolated from each other, facing different environments and different crises, all stumbled into the exact same evolutionary trap and the exact same evolutionary escape. Some scientists believe this level of convergent selection pressure, happening independently and repeatedly across the species, suggests that the transition to dairy farming created one of the most severe and widespread survival bottlenecks in recent human history, not localized to one region, not a single tragic famine, a recurring, worldwide pattern, playing out again and again, wherever humans domesticated milk-producing animals and didn't yet have the biology to handle what they created. You built the trap yourself. Every population that started herding animals, without realizing it, created a new selection pressure against their own children. And every population that survived it did so by losing the people who couldn't adapt fast enough. This is the darkest thread running underneath the entire history of dairy farming. It's not really a story about cows or cheese or agricultural innovation. It's a story about how a food source, meant to provide security and abundance, quietly became one of the harshest filters human populations have ever faced, deciding which family lines continued and which ones didn't, based on a single enzyme most people never think about. And it's still happening today in a much quieter way. Every time someone with lactose intolerance experiences discomfort after consuming dairy, they're expressing the same ancestral biology that shaped this entire history. Every time a population with high lactase persistence rates builds cultural traditions around dairy, cheese, yogurt, milk-based diets, they're living inside the outcome of a selection event most of them have never heard of. So the next time you pour a glass of milk or hesitate before eating something creamy because your stomach might not agree with it, remember what that reaction actually represents. It's not a modern inconvenience. It's not a minor food sensitivity you can just take a pill for. It's the last living echo of one of the harshest survival filters your species ever went through, written directly into the lining of your gut, passed down from ancestors who either adapted or didn't. We like to think of evolution as something that happened to distant, primitive humans, safely locked away in the past. But lactase persistence proves otherwise. It shows evolution acting recently, brutally, and unevenly, reshaping human populations within a handful of millennia, sorting families by something as simple as whether or not they could safely drink from the animals they tamed. You didn't choose whether your ancestors could drink milk, but their answer to that question, repeated across thousands of years, quietly decided whether you'd be standing here at all. There's one more thing worth sitting with before you close this out, because it's the detail that turns this from an interesting fact into something almost uncomfortable to think about. Somewhere in a settlement that no longer has a name, a mother once had to choose: feed the child the milk that's available, or watch the child go hungry while the herd stands right there untouched. Neither option came with a guarantee. and multiply that single impossible choice across thousands of villages, thousands of winters, thousands of years. And you start to understand that the milk in your refrigerator right now is sitting at the end of a chain of decisions nobody wanted to make. It's easy to look at ancient humans as distant, almost fictional characters, stick figures acting out survival scenes in a cave somewhere far removed from anything real. But the biology inside you right now, the exact way your gut responds to dairy, the exact enzymes your body does or doesn't produce, was built by real people making real decisions under real pressure, with no idea that any of it would eventually matter to someone watching a video about it thousands of years later. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Not the cheese, not the genetics, not even the mutation itself. It's a reminder that so much of what feels like a personal trait, a random detail about your own body, is actually inherited history. A quiet vote cast by your ancestors, tallied across centuries, still showing up every time you sit down to eat. So the next time your stomach reacts to something or you notice a craving you can't quite explain, ask yourself where that reaction might actually come from. Because somewhere buried deep in your biology, there's a decision your ancestors made a very long time ago. And whether you know it or not, you're still living with the answer.